Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am here with Dr. Jaime Zuckerman. And you guys, this is going to be a really viable conversation. If you've ever had challenge with someone in your life who's narcissistic and doesn't even know what to do about that, Jaime is going to tell us exactly the tools and tips and information we need to know. So Jaime, thank you so much for spending some of your Monday with me. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Can you please introduce yourself? I'm not going to read your bio. I want in your own,
Sure.
Just who you are and how you got to where you are at this point in your journey. And really, why is it that you're passionate about teaching people about narcissism?
Yeah. So I'm a licensed clinical psychologist outside Philadelphia. I have a private practice. And I also do coaching virtually all over for people who are either in narcissistic relationships, have been in narcissistic relationships, or are trying to get out of them, as well as children of narcissistic parents, adult children, I should say, of narcissistic parents. So that's how I spend my days. And
I hope you sure have some good self-care to
yes.
clear the energy, because that can be very heavy to be working in day in, day out.
It is heavy. I actually make sure I play tennis quite frequently to keep myself grounded and present. But yeah, so how did I get started in this? So I originally, and I still do work with anxiety and depression. But in my practice over the years, I have an outpatient practice, and I see men also, but more so women than men. And a lot of women were coming to me with, over the years, a very similar presentation of their relationships. And, I always say this in grad school, one of the personality disorders we focused on so heavily was borderline personality disorder. We never focused on narcissism. We were taught to kind of think that narcissistic personality disorder was this grandiose, which it can be, this grandiose, larger than life, self-centered, selfish human being. And that's true sometimes, but there's a whole other domain of narcissism, this kind of hidden, covert narcissism that isn't outwardly obvious to people. And so I started seeing these patterns, and it really kind of fit the mold for narcissism. And it just kind of hit me like, wow, this is way more prevalent than we were taught, because it's such a, if you look at the statistics on this and the percentages, it's very low compared to other diagnoses, other personality disorders in the general population. Problem with that, with narcissism, and this is where I think a lot of the misconception comes in. People say, like, everyone's diagnosing everyone with not narcissism, and it's so rare. No one has it like this. And yes and no. The trouble with narcissism, and we'll get into that, for true narcissistic personality disorder, the reason why the numbers are so low is because nobody reports it. They don't go to treatment.
I was going to say,
there's no way to identify them, and not to mention the people that are in these relationships as the victims and the survivors. They're not reporting it because they don't even know what to call it, because it's so surreal and so crazy making that they can't even put it into words. So there's numerous reasons why that number is so low. And I started coming across this. Then when the pandemic hit, what I realized was a lot of people who were home now, right, stuck at home in these abusive relationships, were really going to social media to just as an outlet to get help. And people started sharing their stories. And I think it was always there, but it grew significantly. I personally think, and this is just anecdotal, through the pandemic, I saw people talking about this more and more and more. And I always had been talking about it, but it kind of just blew up from there. And people just really started talking about it. In addition to that, during the pandemic, my closest, dearest friend in the world was going through a divorce with somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder, ironically. And I had a front row seat to it. And it was, and still is, even after the divorce, which we can talk about post-separation abuse, it's absolutely horrible. And it's different than a toxic relationship. It's different than an abusive relationship. It's not narcissistic. It's, all narcissistic relationships are abusive, but not all abusive relationships are narcissistic. And so they're very unique in their presentation, and they're really the only type of relationship, whether with a parent, whether with a child, whether with a significant other, the only one that really requires an actual exit strategy to get out of the relationship. So it's very unique in its presentation.
There's so much in what you just said. And before we go in further, if I could pause and maybe just look at some of those pieces for people who are listening that might have their ears perking up already. And one of the really important things for me, who works with, clients as well, and is this idea that the reports are so low because they don't have the self-awareness to realize, oh, I need help. And if someone tells someone who's narcissistic, hey, you need to go get help for this, they're going to rage and they're going to be in denial and externalize.
Correct.
It's not like anxiety and depression in
Correct.
which someone knows, oh, like I don't feel the best version of myself, and I see the world around me living in a different way. I want to live more like
I
them.
want that. Yes. Right.
So for those listening who are like, but why don't they self-report? Why are the numbers so low? It's because you got to understand, and I'm not the expert, but I just know from my experience as a practitioner, it's very different than someone with anxiety and depression. And we need to really give that the understanding of why this is so difficult to be around in relationship with. And I love that you named the exit strategy. And I do want to make a point to come back at some point, just before I forget, is to look at the crossover of borderline and narcissism. Because you mentioned that, like in grad school, borderline is what's studied more, but I think people have a lot of confusion. So I just want to make sure I'm just putting a little
great question.
That we really come back to address that.
And I also say too, because I oftentimes, some of the comments that I get will be things like, you're stigmatizing people with narcissistic personality disorder. You're supposed to help people. This is horrible what you're saying. And here's what I say: that when I report things about narcissism, I'm reporting symptoms. They sound that bad because they are that bad, the symptoms, right? And I always say, yes, people say, well, they're wounded humans too. And they very well may be. But there's plenty of wounded, quote, I hate that word, but wounded humans that don't function in that way, right? And then the other part of it too is when as a psychologist, my job is to help people. So for me to actually say out loud that your only option is to leave and cut out the narcissist, like for me to say that, saying fully blanket statement, they will never change, is really difficult for me as a psychologist to actually say, because that goes against all I do. So,
which is fundamentally believe that growth and change is possible, right?
Right, exactly. And so, when I say that, I want people to understand, like, I don't say that lightly. And you're right. It's very different than anxiety and depression. Anxiety and depression, people don't like how they feel. That not liking how they feel is what motivates them to want to feel different and do different and live different. Somebody with a personality disorder, particularly narcissistic personality disorder, they are not bothered in any way by how they operate in the world. They are not bothered by the tumultuous relationships they have. They are not bothered by, the inability to maintain connection. It doesn't even faze them. There is no motivation to change because they don't feel that it would benefit them in any way.
They don't see there's a problem.
There's no problem. And if there is a problem, it's your problem.
Right. Yeah. Right. Things wouldn't be so bad if you weren't so upset with me all the time. If you didn't do this, then it wouldn't be a problem. If you weren't so sensitive, if you weren't so insecure. So for those who are listening, who think about narcissism in a very pop culture sort of word, can we maybe start with a more technical definition so we really have an understanding of whether someone's just being an asshole?
Yep.
And
I say that all the time.
Actually being narcissistic.
Yes. So the biggest difference between somebody who's an asshole and somebody who's a narcissist is that somebody who is a narcissist is going to be a narcissist in every single domain of their life. They may appear to be very charitable, charming, affectionate, helpful on the outside, but it's a facade. That acting in that way is still part of that narcissistic disorder because it's acting a certain way to get what you need in any given situation. Whereas somebody who's an asshole, they may be an asshole at work, but they're not an asshole with their friends, right? Or they may be a certain way with certain people, but not other people. It shifts and it changes, and it may change over time as they work out their own issues, right? Like maybe they have a drinking problem, or maybe they went through a really difficult divorce. And so as they're going through these changes in their life, that tendency to be an asshole may shift and change, right? Narcissistic personality disorder is not it's not fluid. It's a core kind of component of who that person is. It doesn't shift.
Can I ask a question on what you just said? Because this is something that I've always been curious about. And for the narcissist who is doing the facade, who is charming, right? That's typically one of the characteristics. Someone who's very charming, someone who is super personable, life of the party, acts of charity, like, look what a good person I am.
Yep.
And then, right, are they aware that that is a facade? Are they aware that they are turning it off and off? Because it's all a manipulation tactic.
Yes, they are 100%. I get this question all the time. Do they know what they're doing? Yes, they know what they're doing. Now, could they maybe be doing it almost on automatic pilot? Absolutely. However, the difference between somebody who has, let's say, toxic patterns versus somebody who's a narcissist, when you call out their behavior, somebody who has toxic patterns, who doesn't want to be that way, may say, oh my God, I didn't realize I was hurting you, and may want to work on that over time, even if it's difficult. They may argue with you at first, but they know that they don't want to be like that. Whereas a narcissist, if you call them out, you're not going to get that. You're going to get deflection, rage, silent treatment, abusive behavior. So that's kind of the difference. They are very aware that they're doing it. And this is why when people say, well, narcissists have difficulty controlling their anger. No, they don't. If anything, they are very, very, very good at controlling their anger, for the simple fact that they will keep it all together. You're at an event, you're at a party, you're at a PTA meeting, and you're great. As soon as you get home behind closed doors, or as soon as that person gets off the phone, then you kind of release that anger. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're very good at managing and controlling their anger, because they use that anger as a tactic to scare you, to deflect, to control you, to have you walk on eggshells. So it's very purposeful. And the reason why I think it's so hard for people to accept they know what they're doing is because then you have to take the next step and say, that's really evil. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. When people say, like, you're stigmatized, it is that bad. It is that bad. And so, when I have patients, or, I see a woman who comes into my office and, she's financially abused, emotionally abused, and sexually abused constantly for the last 20 years. I can't sit there and say, well, I know that you've been sexually abused routinely for years, but they're a wounded person too. That will never come out of my mouth. Never. Yeah. So, I understand that they're coming from a place of maybe trauma, maybe not. But
it's still conscious behavior.
There's still conscious behavior. And listen, there's plenty of us that come from those types of, abusive upbringings or traumatic upbringings and don't function this way.
Right. So, okay. So going back, let's get some really clear characteristics. And I love how you keep differentiating between just a toxic relationship and what the actual differences are. So can we go through some of those?
Yeah. So with narcissistic personality disorder, a sense of entitlement to power, to money, to sex, to whatever. The grandiosity. Oftentimes it's, they think that they are way larger than they are, but the problem is their actions never support that. So they want all these things and think all these things, but yet their actions don't kind of follow that. So they're kind of like their life, this facade that they build for themselves, doesn't actually add up to the actual behaviors they do on a day-to-day basis. Extremely controlling of emotions, controlling of time, controlling of just other people in general. They lack accountability. They will never take accountability for their actions. It is always everybody else's fault. They have a very hard time maintaining relationships, like healthy relationships. They don't have healthy relationships. They tend to look at people as objects, interchangeable objects that serve a certain function and purpose, including their children. And when that purpose is no longer needed, or they, for whatever reason, then that person is painted bad and they're set aside until they are needed again. So those are some of the kind of lack of empathy is another huge one.
Because that's what I think that most people, if I had to guess, most people would think narcissists don't have empathy as the basis.
They can fake empathy. Mm-hmm. They can fake it for sure, but no, they do not have empathy. And if they appear to have empathy, it's because it's getting them something in the moment.
It's a manipulation. It's a tactic for likely control or emotional abuse or power over. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And can we briefly, as we're going through this definition, talk about the crossover with borderline? Because I know there is some good, melding of the two personality disorders, which is a thrill to be around or part of relationship with.
So, borderline personality disorder is, as far as relationships go, are extremely difficult, right? Extremely difficult in terms of the walking on eggshells. That part is similar. A lot of the anger outbursts, that part is similar. What's very different, though, between the two is that people with borderline personality disorder fear real or imagined abandonment, right? They don't want to be left. They want to be connected to somebody. They want to be loved. They want to be cared for. Whereas narcissistic personality disorder, they don't want a connection. They want to be admired. They want to be recognized. They don't perceive, they don't want to have a bond with somebody. They can't, and that's not of interest to them. It's very one way. Somebody also.
So would you say that? Can I ask one quick question on that? So if that driving factor of borderline is fear of abandonment, real or perceived, then the driving factor of narcissism is power and control. Is it that simple?
Yes. Yep. Yes. Well said. Yep. Exactly. And also with borderline personality disorder, their goal is not to, with their behaviors, it's to keep somebody from leaving them. Again, it's focused on that abandonment. Whereas with narcissism, their behaviors are, like you said, to feel in control, to feel powerful. It actually has nothing to do with the other person. They will step on whoever they need to be able to get what they need. Whoever gets hurt in that process, kind of a casualty of war almost, right? Like it's not almost so there's that with borderline personality disorder, they have very labile emotions, right? So very up, down. They have difficulty controlling their affect. They may not necessarily recognize the role that they play in the downward spiral of their relationships. However, borderline personality disorder with the correct treatment, proper treatment, is very treatable. It's a long process and it's kind of a lifelong focus, but it is treatable. If you give somebody with borderline personality disorder emotion regulation strategies and you give them, coping skills to kind of handle those extremes and to, learn that just because somebody's not physically present doesn't mean they're abandoning you. And you give them these strategies.
A lot of self-regulation.
They can absolutely have, they may always have some difficulty, but they can absolutely have healthy relationships and have awareness and insight into what they're doing.
Right.
Narcissism, you're not going to get that.
Yeah. I often see, just again, for those listeners to help differentiate and sometimes have that curiosity of, is my partner or, someone in my life. I tend to, whenever I see suicidality as a threat, an end of the relationship, it's generally a good sign the person's borderline. If they're threatening, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. That's always been one of my biggest red flags when working with clients. And, another one that I see a lot of is kind of an over enmeshment with their partner, like, kind of that blending with taking on someone's identity that, so they diffuse any sense of self because they are so fearful of being alone. They will become a chameleon to an nth degree for fear of being left.
Well, and that's a difference. See, narcissists do the same thing. They will adapt to whatever situation they need to. They'll become whatever they need to become to connect with you as a strategy to manipulate you. You see this in love bombing, right? In the beginning of the relationship, they will become exactly what it is you need. and they'll take on that role. The difference is they're not doing it because they don't want you to leave and they're fearful that you'll abandon them. And it's not for that purpose. It's to manipulate you and suck you in and control you down the line. Whereas, like you said, with someone who has borderline personality disorder, they're doing it because their sense of self is so low and so foreign to them that they kind of do whatever they need to do to keep that person close to them, to define who they are.
So I think for those listeners, that's some pretty good differentiation and understanding of the language of what we're talking about. So let's go into more of what it looks like to be in a relationship with a narcissist. You talked about kind of the early love bombing that can happen early on in dating, what it's like to be married to one, to divorce one, and then to be the child of one. And I mean, I've worked with clients and the whole range of that, and it still continues as a lifelong challenge.
Yeah.
So can you kind of take us maybe through that lifespan?
Sure. So there is a cycle of abuse that's common with narcissists, and that usually starts with love bombing, right? And this isn't just for romantic relationships. This is kind of the cycle for majority of the abuse that occurs. The love bombing, which is, and I'll just give dating as an example. If you hear in the first month, "You're my soulmate. Where have you been? You are everything I've been looking for. I can't believe I found you." It's like we have our own language.
Oh,
and you
Jamie,
start.
That sounds so lovely.
Doesn't it? It sounds like so amazing.
He loves
I know. So here's what I say to people. I get it. It feels freaking good, right? And it feels good because it's not the norm, right? That's that fairy tale, Hollywood, Disney. I always curse Disney for making us think that these fairy tales, that's what you need to find. I know there's people listening to be like, well, I met my soulmate and I'm married to him. That's great. But you're in the 0.00001%. And you probably didn't call each other soulmates on the first couple of dates. You say that now, but at the time you probably didn't. Right. And so if you hear that, as much as it sounds amazing, run. Because here's the thing, as lovely and wonderful as you may be, somebody is telling you that you are their soulmate before they even know one thing about you. Mm-hmm. You may be lovely, but they're basing it on absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And so you have to take a step back and kind of look at that objectively and see, okay, I know that feels good, but they don't really know me. How do they even know we'll get along? They don't. Right. And so it's very purposeful.
What about excessive gift giving or extravagant dates? Is that another form of love bombing?
Yep. So there's a whole host of different things. So there's the soulmate, there's, you'll go on one date and then it's nonstop texting after that. And you think it's great because you're like, oh my God, they're checking in. They love me.
He's so emotionally available. Look how communicative he is.
Exactly. Or, they'll just show up at your office and bring you flowers and you think it's amazing. But really what they're doing is they're just making sure that they know where you are. Or, the best one is when they send you flowers, right? But they don't sign their name. And so they do it because they want to see if you're dating other people, because if you thank them for the flowers, then they know they're the only one. But if there's other people, you're going to be like, oh, sneaky. Wait, I don't know. Right. Exactly.
Oh, so sneaky.
Or things like, are they asking you questions about yourself or are they not? Or are they asking you questions about yourself, not listening, and then asking you the same exact questions again, the next date and the next date? When you tell them that you're busy, how do they respond? Are they okay with that? Do they give you crap for it? Do they not listen and come over anyway? Do they get angry?
Basically, are they, testing your boundaries right off the bat?
Testing your boundaries. Yep. So I always tell people, if you're not sure, break plans with them last minute and see what happens. Say you're sick, or say something came up, or whatever you need, there's an emergency and you have to break plans with them and see what happens. They will very, very, very quickly kind of if you feel that you are discussing really deep rooted secrets, emotions, traumas, stories from your upbringing, or just things that you really don't ever talk about. If you feel that you are saying those things to this person very soon, when you don't do that, chances are it's because they know how to make you feel safe and feel vulnerable with them, so that you tell them all these things. They store it away, so that down the road later on, after they've kind of locked you in, they use those things against you. So they're storing your vulnerabilities, they're taking note, and they're keeping it for later use, because they will use that against you. The lavish gifts, you see that a lot, the vacations, posting all over social media. What the person doesn't realize is that not only are there probably 5 other people in the wings, but it's pretty likely that they just got out of something else, and that, it's like, it's never just you. It's never just you. And it may seem like it's amazing, and you're being introduced to their parents, and you guys are talking about flying to Paris in August when it's September. And so it's that future faking, those promises that they keep you locked in for, or things like moving in really fast and saying, oh no, you don't need to work anymore. Work part-time. I'll take care of you. So they're already trying to kind of control your finances, or, no, quit your job. Come work for me. Let's go into this together, so that they slowly start to monitor your finances. Do they describe all their exes as crazy? Mm-hmm. Are they always the victim? What's their relationship like with their kids, if they have kids? Do they only have them once or twice a month? And why is that? These are the things that you need to ask yourself.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to all this, what is the percentage of men versus women who are narcissists?
So diagnostically speaking, more men are quote diagnosed, even if secondhand, than women. But I caution people on that, because they're very much are narcissistic. Women who have narcissistic personality disorder. I think sometimes what happens is, because it presents a little bit differently, sometimes it may be misdiagnosed as borderline personality disorder, or it may be misdiagnosed as really anxious and neurotic, or depression, because they tend to be more manipulative with emotions, and like kind of take on that victim role. Like, well, if you loved me, you wouldn't do this. Or, they say to their kids, I can't believe you're going away to college and you're just going to leave me here. So it's very kind of emotional manipulation and guilt.
For you.
Yes, I raised you. Correct. Exactly. So women definitely have it. It's looked at, it's demonstrated a little bit differently. But the manipulation and the function of their behavior is exactly the same. It's just dressed up differently.
Yeah. Oh, it brings up so much to me of just knowing from the people I know whose relationships are stuck there. It's a lot. And for those who've never had experience, or a friend who hasn't experienced with one, consider yourself lucky, because it's emotional and psychological torture.
Yes.
And okay, so we went through that early part, the love bombing. So that painted a really good picture of what can happen early on. And I just have to honor, if you've been a victim to this, I just feel compelled to say, just have compassion for yourself.
Yes.
Right. I mean, this is huge. It
has nothing to do with intelligence. It has we are all susceptible to it. The only kind of chance you have against love bombing is having the education of what it is beforehand. That's why I kind of look at this as preventative medicine. Otherwise, who wouldn't go for that? We all would.
And for so many, I'm just going to generalize and say, women who have this experience of love bombing, knowing how hard the dating pool is.
Yes.
Easy to feel like, oh, he's a good catch. Look how present and available, and all the things that women are wanting.
Yep.
And so again, if you've experienced this is, not to make you feel embarrassed or shameful, but really just understand they're really skilled in what they're doing.
Yes.
And even with great education, you still might miss it.
Yes. Correct. Absolutely.
So, okay. So let's move on to now we're in relationship.
Yes. So eventually what will start to happen once they have you, right? So once either you move in, or you're, together, or they know that you are with them and they feel that they have that control. What happens is they start to devalue you. So that's that devaluation stage. They start to, make comments here and there, like, you're going out with your friends and they say something like, oh, girl, Jamie, I don't know. There's something about her I don't trust. I can't figure it out. Or, they'll say about your parents, like, do your parents always get this involved? Like, don't you feel like they treat you like a child? Or so they start to throw these things in there that this loving person obviously wouldn't say unless they really meant it. And you believe them because they're such good people. So they start to slowly put these seeds of doubt in your head of the people around you. And the reason for that is because they want to start to isolate you from friends and family for a couple of reasons. One, so they are the only one that has access to you, so they can control you. Two, so that you're not able to tell anyone about the abuse. And that's why when I say they do it purposely. They know exactly what they're doing. They may start to do things like, you get dressed up to go out to dinner and they say something like, you're wearing way too much makeup. Like, I don't know why you think you kind of like take it off. You don't look good. Things like that. I like you natural. Right. Or, and I don't, people are listening to think, well, my significant other tells me they like me, with no makeup. I don't mean these individual occurrences. This is a culmination of all of these things. One of these things, or even two of these things alone, mean nothing. So it's all of these things together. They'll start to do things like, let's say you go out with your friends and you are calling them, telling them you'll be home. They don't answer. You go home, they're not there. They just kind of disappear for a day or two and they don't call you and they're mad at you and they give you the silent treatment, or, and you're trying to wonder what you did wrong, and you're, begging for forgiveness and what did I do? And it's so confusing because it's never happened before and you don't know what you did. And so they start to make you very confused as to why they're upset and something you did, but they're not really going to tell you what it is. You have to figure it out. And just when you think you figured it out, they change the rules up. And so this starts happening over and over. And when you have a blow up argument, let's say, then the love bombing will start to happen again, but never as much as in the beginning, because they don't need to. They just dangle this carrot just enough to keep you there. And so it's almost like a drug addiction, which that intermittent reinforcement, that hot, cold, makes you so addicted to it. It is literally the model of addiction. What ends up happening is you just want that dopamine fix, right? You want that rush again. The problem is you're never going to get it because they deliberately won't give it to you. But the other part of it is the person you saw in the love bombing stage was a complete and total facade. That's not them. That they are who you see now. So when people say, I just wish we could get back to where we were, well, that's great. But that person was deliberately pretending to be something they weren't to get you into this stage. So it's this constant back and forth, up and down of them kind of coming back in and saying, I'm sorry, I want to work on things. I want to make it better. And then it goes for a week and then boom, they're back to where they were before. And so, after a while, that supply that they get from you, meaning the control that they have on you and your emotional responses to it, and them knowing that they're making you frazzled and crazy and gaslighting you and you're doubting your reality and you don't know which end is up, and all these responses they're pulling from you, that gives them supply. They like that. It fuels them.
It makes them feel powerful.
It makes them feel powerful. When that starts to get old, when that starts to diminish, that supply, they'll ramp it up, right? But eventually it gets old for them. And that's when you see a lot of times they'll discard you, meaning they just like end the relationship and they're gone. Or they start to, they always have people on the side, but now they start to kind of leave you to be with somebody else. And the whole thing starts over again with the love bombing, and they throw it in your face and you think they're different with this person, but it's not. It's the same cycle. So it's this constant ongoing vicious cycle. And when they discard you, so when they just kind of, they're done with you and it's this blow up, abusive, ragey kind of argument or whatever they do, and they say the meanest, cruelest, most horrific things to you, but then they're never really gone, because then they do what we call hoovering, right, where they kind of suck you back in with promises to change, promises to leave the other person, promises to go to therapy, promises to do this, to bring you back in. And people say, well, how could you go back to them? How could you go? What's wrong with you? And the truth of the matter is it's not an intelligence thing. It's not that you're, weak. It has nothing to do with that. It truly is this almost chemical addiction in a way. It's an addictive pattern, and it's extremely hard to break.
Yeah. So when someone catches on and realizes, oh shit, this is not just an unhealthy relationship. Like you said, he's not just, or she's not just being an asshole or manipulative. Getting out of it can feel near impossible.
Yes.
So
So
you said in the beginning, you needed to have an exit strategy. So what are
yeah.
some really effective strategies to be able to successfully exit? And if you're divorcing and you've got kids and you are
Oh,
tied to this person forever, what do you do then?
yeah. So I'll put the kids on the side for a second because that's a whole different situation. But generally speaking, um, when you start to catch on to the blueprint, because it's very textbook. People always say, well, how do you know they have narcissism? You're not treating them because the way the symptoms are being reported, it's so textbook, you can predict what comes next. And so when you realize what these patterns are and you start to catch on, you're able to start to predict what comes next, what they're going to do next. So it empowers you because now you're multiple steps ahead of them. And so when you start to realize that, you start to kind of separate yourself from that enmeshment, that whatever you want to call it, you start to separate yourself and look at them objectively and see that these patterns exist, whether you're in it or not, and that it actually has nothing to do with you and that you've never done anything wrong. And so it's kind of it's a lot of people have this aha moment where, now it doesn't mean aha, like I'm out of here and gone and everything's great. Just an aha moment as far as, holy shit, wait a minute, they're a narcissist. Like what? And then like they have this moment of this epiphany of like, holy crap. And they start to be able
Now
to
you
predict this
can't
stuff.
unsee
And you
what you now
can't
know.
unsee it. Once you see it, you can never unsee it. That is my, I hate saying favorite because none of this is good, but that is one of the best moments in working with somebody who is in this situation, when they have that moment. And then the next time I meet with them, they're like, oh my God, they did this and this. I can never unsee it. And they start thinking of old things that happened. And they're like, oh my God, we had this fight. It was Mother's Day. Of course they started with me, right? Or like, oh my God, like it was my birthday and they threw such a fit and crashed the car into the garage and because it was my birthday. And so they can prep themselves and they're aware of these patterns. So once that happens and they make the decision to leave, what I tell people is a couple things. One, I think on average, it's like 7 times before you actually leave. Leave, come back, leave, come back, leave, come back. Now, here's the thing. Don't look at leaving and coming back as a failure. It's part of a very long process of disconnecting from this person. This is not a normal breakup. It is not. Your self-concept, your self-esteem, your self-identity is almost non-existent at this point. You don't know what music you like. You don't know what your favorite color is. You have no idea what your interests are. You don't know who you are. You don't know how you like to dress because you've been fed this narrative of what you're supposed to like and think and be for so long. So I have men too, who on the other side of this, like, I don't even know what music I like. I could never even, I have no idea. So it's very scary because one, you're leaving with really very low sense of self and self-identity. 2, chances are you do not have access to finances because your finances have been controlled. Even if you are the primary breadwinner and they do absolutely nothing, which happens often, you don't have control of your finances. So what I tell people is if they start to have that feeling that they want to leave, first, somebody that you trust. And even if you're isolated from so many people, the people that you feel most, that you can be most vulnerable with, they miss you and they're concerned about you. So whoever you feel comfortable with, start to set aside, even if it's $10 a week or something, start to set aside money safely. If you can, give it to somebody else, however you want to do it, start to set aside money.
Can I share something on that one that I've heard people who have done is the narcissist partner is going to be so controlling with the money that you sometimes have to do it in ways that they may not see.
Gift cards.
And gift cards at the supermarket.
Gift cards at the supermarket.
Yes. And I've known people who have saved thousands.
Yes.
Over years.
Yes.
And I know multiple people that have done this because it's not going to be an item on the
It'll look like you bought bananas and $100 worth of groceries. That's it. Yep. Where you go to Target, you bought $100 of whatever, but it was a gift card, so there's creative ways to do it. And this is some of the stuff I actually work with people on, is strategizing how to do this. But you want to also make sure that you have somewhere to go. You need to, I always tell people, if you can, have a separate cell phone, don't use your credit cards, and make sure that you let people know kind of what's going on, even if they don't understand, so that they don't tell people where you are, or they don't answer the phone when they call, or whatever the case may be. Also understand that when you leave, they're going to smear your character all over the place. They're going to say you're a drug addict. They're going to say you're an alcoholic. They're going to say you cheated on them. They're going to say you were the abusive one. You're the crazy one. You're on all these medications. You're a terrible mom. You're a terrible dad, whatever. Do not even for 1 second attempt to defend yourself. That is what they want, because then they're still controlling you. Just know that that is going to happen. Just assume it's going to happen. The less you engage, as difficult as it is, the more disconnected and freer you're going to start to feel. But it is a long process. When you have, and they will come back. So here's the other thing. Post-separation abuse, so the abuse you have after the separation, can sometimes be even worse than the abuse you have during the relationship.
Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah, so when people leave the relationship, during that time when they're leaving, that is the most dangerous time for violence. So, when people leave, you have to make sure that you're doing this safely. And if you're scared for any reason, put in protective measures, right? Or stay a little bit longer. If it's more dangerous to leave and you need to make sure that you have the right strategy to leave, then wait, as long as you're not being harmed at home, because that's the highest time for violence. So you want to just be mindful of that. Yeah, I forgot. I lost my train of thought on the other thing I was going to say.
This is the post-separation abuse.
Oh, the post-separation abuse. Thank you. So you have to remember, when you leave a narcissist, you won. You already won. And the narcissist knows that. And so the fact that you left them is just so beyond comprehension for them. The lack of control that they feel, the lack of power they feel, the feelings that they've been buried down, that shame and guilt that they push so far down, starting to bubble to the surface. And that's when you see that rage, right? That's when you see that violence. So you want to understand that when you leave, that's likely going to be triggered somewhat, because how dare you do this to them? If you are married with children, I strongly advise you to contact an attorney for a consult before you leave. A lot of attorneys will give free consults, right? You have a long road ahead of you. The process of leaving, the reason why I tell people to speak to an attorney first is each state has different rules about what's considered abandonment with kids, what's considered kidnapping with kids. Like, you have to make sure that you do it correctly. Unfortunately, in many states, the family courts are not very well versed in coercive abuse. They're not very supportive of, particularly women, going through divorces with children in custody with a partner who is abusive and who's a narcissist, who's abusive. The court is a stage for the narcissist. So they will do everything they can to make you look bad. They will do everything they can to make you struggle, to delay everything, to drag you through the mud for years if they need to. Spend all your money so that you go broke trying to fight them. Make it like they want custody, and they don't want custody. They don't want their kids. They need it because it looks good for them.
Right.
But the children are usually in the way of their wanting to live their life. So they will fight you tooth and nail on the children, because they know that that's all they have left to be able to control you, is your time, the custody, and your kids. So that's what you can expect. And it's difficult. I recommend people only using the court apps to communicate. I recommend that you find an attorney who's not just well-versed in divorce and all that, but who understands coercive abuse and understands how that plays out in the court system. That's really important, because so it makes my blood boil. But I have had so many people, friends, patients, that'll tell me that their attorneys flat out said to them, "Don't bring the abuse up." And it's like, oh my God. Yeah. Because the judge doesn't want to hear it. It's just money, numbers, custody, percentages, algorithms, and that's it. And it's really upsetting, because it's oftentimes, it somehow we see this all the time, although it's getting better, but the woman in these cases, let's say, tends to look, quote, crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
which
difficult.
is so unfortunate after they've been in a relationship of gaslighting for, and now they're in a system in which they're not being valued.
Correct.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I want to touch quickly on two more things. If you are the child of a narcissistic parent, even you mentioned earlier in the beginning, an adult child, but there's clients of mine, there's people in my life that have teenage children of narcissistic parents in divorce situations. And so what are some of the best strategies? I mean, I've always believed education is one of the most helpful tools, especially for a child. So that way they know it's not their fault. It's not personal. It's not them. The more equipped they are with awareness of the patterns, the more they can predict it, the more they can have strategies. Beyond that, it's still a parent, right? So how do you recommend, let's just say as an arbitrary number, age 15, 16, which are, emotionally more developed to be able to understand it than a younger teenager. What would you say are best strategies from, that young adult stage? And then it's a different strategy when you're an adult, because you can actually decide to not have that person in your life.
Yeah. So it's an excellent question. My first thing is they really should be in therapy on their own. They really should be in therapy with somebody who understands coercive abuse, narcissistic abuse within a family dynamic. And at no time should that therapist ever say, well, let's bring the parent, you guys aren't getting along, let's bring them in. If a therapist ever says to you, when your child's in therapy, let's bring in the narcissistic parent, that therapist does not understand narcissistic abuse, period.
Okay, that should never happen. I've ever heard, because I know so many cases in which the narcissistic parent is being brought in, and it causes more trauma, and it's never going to get to the reconciliation.
That poor child is never going to be honest. They have to drive home with this person. That's why I also say couples therapy. You never go to couples therapy with a narcissist.
Take your own car. Take your own car.
Right. That's what I mean. You never go to couples therapy with a narcissist. You never go to family therapy with a narcissist. If they are brought in, that therapist does not understand narcissistic abuse, period, end of story. Find a different therapist. I'm making a blanket statement on that.
I so appreciate that, Jamie.
Yeah, there is literally zero reason that the narcissistic parent, there's no benefit to that whatsoever, period. None. It re-traumatizes the child. It invalidates their experiences. It scares the crap out of them. They're going to get abused when they go home again. I mean, it's just,
they're going to get punished.
They're going to get gaslit, because the parent's going to talk about all these they're not doing this. It's the other parent, and it's the kid, and the kid has problems, and he has ADHD.
Parental alienation in there as well.
That's a whole other, don't even get me started. That's a whole other catastrophe. So there's that. The other is, research shows time and time again, you need one stable parent. One stable parent. Chances are, the non-narcissistic parent is going to have to be that stable parent, which is really difficult. And stable doesn't mean never expressing negative emotions. Stable means expressing appropriate emotions and explaining why you have them. All too often, the non-narcissistic parent goes through life trying to protect their children, understandably so, from the abuse. But by doing that, at the same time, you're not showing them the patterns, right? So it always looks like the non-narcissistic parent is taking the brunt of things, is never, has no boundaries, that kind of thing. So you want to understand that you need to be honest with your children at an age appropriate level. And I don't work with kids, so I couldn't even begin to tell you what age appropriate is.
And I think it might really depend on the kid, right? I mean,
it depends on the kid.
I work with kids for years, and some 11-year-olds have more emotional depth and awareness than some 16-year-olds. Yep. I would just say, from my experience of working with kids for so many years, you know your child best. Yep. You know their emotional capacity and their ability to kind of see the bigger picture. Because some younger kids are going to be so egocentric, they couldn't even externalize a pattern that isn't about them.
Correct.
So exactly. It's a really individual child basis.
Yep. So there's that. And also understand that as the parent, when they come home from the narcissistic parent's house, they're going to come in. It's going to be like a whirlwind. It's going to take you at least 2 days to get everybody back to baseline. Everyone's emotions are going to be all over the place. So again, you want to make sure that you validate their experiences, that you understand how they feel because you do, that you're there for them, and that they, as long as they are boundaried and appropriate, are allowed to express all of these emotions to you. You're there for them. You understand them, and you're going to listen to them because, they're coming home from this toxic environment, whatever that's going to look like, whether they're love bombing their kids that day and then the next day discarding them. I mean, it's so inconsistent. And so you need to be the consistent parent. That is the most important thing, is that you must be the consistent parent. That would be my biggest tip for that. That's what I tell people.
And I've seen people turn around as a result of having that consistent parent.
Absolutely. And that's the thing I was going to say. Your kids are
really
not
can make a difference. It's not that they're doomed forever. They're going to have trauma, yes, and they will still be able to have healthy relationships moving forward by the consistency of that parent. So just anyone listening out there.
And you modeling as the healthy parent, appropriate boundaries, when you start dating or you have friendships, them seeing what that looks like and appropriate relationships and modeling it for them. And then, the other thing too, is for people that are going through this, who are on the other side or trying to leave it, it is a really tough process. It is a really tough journey, and you will need help emotionally, financially, literally, as far as sometimes even just somewhere to stay. I mean, you're going to need help. You can't do it alone. However, there is another side to it. You will get through it. It's difficult, and that's why we talk about it. But there is another side, and you will get to that other side. And I always tell people, how do I know when I'm getting to this other side? And one of the things I say, and they kind of look at me with this weird face because they don't know how exactly to take it, because nothing about this is funny. I say, when you get to a point where the narcissistic ex or the narcissistic parent that you don't speak to anymore, whatever the case may be, does X, Y, and Z, instead of getting angry and sad and upset, you look at it and laugh. That's how you know that you are on that other side. And I know people are listening going like, none of this is funny. It's not at all. But when you're able to look at it objectively and you look at their patterns and you see that they're doing it, it's so textbook, that it's so predictable, that it becomes almost laughable.
Almost comical.
Almost comical.
Almost. But from kind of a satire, almost like I can laugh at the irony of the pain of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like the phrase, because I've had clients over the years who've been with such difficult relationships, even narcissist or not, but still a lot of toxicity, that even receiving an email from an ex can generate so much fear and anxiety and re-traumatizing. And one of my reframes, once they're on that other side or through that tunnel, is almost gratitude, kind of in that, way of, thank you, universe, for reminding me of, Jamie just being Jamie. No, but this, it's not personal. Like, once you can depersonalize it,
that's right.
It's, they're just being them again. Yep. Oh, right. That's just exactly who they are. And I had a client once years ago, and she ended up printing it out and put it on her board above her computer. So whenever she saw an email, thank you, universe, for reminding me exactly who he is. And this is just yet another reminder. It's not about me. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. And now I'm grateful that I do see it. So it really is. Thank you, universe.
And and the other thing too is, especially with Mother's Day that came around, one of the things that I have people do is, okay, maybe it won't happen, but it may happen. So look for it. And when it happens, write it down. And they won't know what I'm talking, they're kind of like, what happens? And then I'll, without question, when I speak to them, I know what you meant. Yep, he did X, Y, and Z, or yep, she did X, Y, and Z, like clockwork, on Mother's Day, on Father's Day, on my birthday. It's like, when it happens, you're kind of like, oh, yep, there it is. Yep, there they did it. Yep, there it is right there. And instead of engaging in it, you look at it from afar, almost like as an audience member of their show that you're no longer in. And, and so the fact that they're able to identify it and almost look for it and wait for it, and then they see it and it's like, yep, there it is. There it goes. There she goes. Okay. It's kind of this, like you said, this objectivity, and it feels so empowering because you realize it had nothing to do with you. Whether
never
you're
did.
there or no one else, it's going to be like this with everyone. It has nothing to do with anybody but them.
Yeah. One last thing I want to say is for those who've gotten out of the narcissistic relationship, I have found, in addition to therapy, and I'm curious what your experience is in helping with this as well, but helping someone understand codependency and how maybe what their own dynamics were in that relationship, and so how they can prevent themselves of getting in another relationship that maybe fully isn't with a narcissist but might be unhealthy and or toxic, in which patterns of codependency have gotten in the way of someone's such low sense of self-worth makes them more susceptible to these unhealthy relationships. Can you just, is there anything you can add on that piece to just moving
I'm
forward?
glad you said that. So actually, when people come out of these relationships, they're very different than when they went in. Narcissists do not go for weak, low self-esteem people. Narcissists go for very, outwardly engaging, friendly, successful, attractive, confident,
smart.
Smart because one, they like the limelight. Two, look who I landed, right? And three, you're higher up for them to knock down. They get a thrill from that. So if they're not attracted to, not that they're not attracted to, but they're not going to go for somebody who they're not going to get as much supply
right?
From.
Because
they're not going to get anything from knocking them down. They're already low. And so I think when people come out of that relationship, that's when their self-esteem is low. That's when they have very low self-concept. So I actually find the opposite happens. I find that when they come out of relationships, they are so hesitant to get back into something because they are so overly hyper vigilant and hyper aware of other people's motives. They are so cautious of that I just had this conversation today with somebody that somebody went to do something and the person I was talking to said, can you believe in the motive, this, that, and I'm like, why can't they just want to go? And it's just kind of like, I didn't even think of that. Right. And so it's, I think the opposite happens. I don't necessarily think that there's this codependency. I think that they were so abused and so gaslit for so long that the only way to survive was to help and protect the abuser. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think when they're out of that relationship, listen, does it happen? Of course it happens where they get back into unhealthy relationships. Maybe not, like you said, maybe not narcissistic, but into something where somebody maybe is controlling or, their needs always come first or something, or, but I think largely this is why therapy is so important afterwards, because you'll learn in therapy what the red flags are. And you'll learn in therapy as you're dating, your therapist will say, okay, well, let's look at this and let's look at this. And what is this a pattern of? And what does this remind you of? And is this familiar to you? And why is it familiar to you? So I actually think that people tend to misinterpret things rather than disregard them, if that makes sense, after a narcissistic relationship.
Yeah. There's so many nuances that
that's the thing. It's so nuanced space. It's so nuanced space, which is why it's so different than other types of toxic relationships.
I want to finish by reading you a quote that I often will read to clients that I absolutely love. And this is the whole, like, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
But it's by R.D. Laing, and it says, they are playing a game. They are playing at not playing a game. If I show them I see they are, I shall break the rules and they will punish me. I must play their game of not seeing I see the game. Right?
I love that.
I love it too, because it's, they're so controlling that the best thing you can do to get out of it is to become aware.
Correct.
And once you see it, all the rules are smashed because you see it as a game and not over personalized.
That's right.
So I just thought for our listeners to hear that. It's a really powerful quote. And when I read it to clients, sometimes they're like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah. It's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. So Jaime, how can people find you? You are such a wealth of really valuable information in an area that I think people misdiagnose, overgeneralize, and you've done a really great job at really giving a very clear picture. Again, there's many assholes out there, there's many unhealthy relationships, but this is something very specific. So thank you for all of that. First of all, I really appreciate your time. But how can people find you? What's the best way to get in touch with resources, and what other things do you offer that they can learn from?
Sure. So I post a lot of this on Instagram. It's DRZ_psychologist. So if you just put in Dr. Z psychologist, it'll show up. My website's drjamiezuckerman.com. If you are in Pennsylvania, we have therapists that see people, and that is under zgrouptherapy.com. Both websites link to each other, so you can find it that way. And then I have 2 books out. They're available on Target, Amazon. One is Find Your Calm. It's a workbook for anxiety, a lot of behavior-based mindfulness strategies. And then Find Good Habits, which is about kind of breaking toxic patterns, shaping them, and maintaining them over time. And
we'll have all those links in the show notes, so those will all be easily accessible. Well, Jaime, again, thank you so much. I really hope people who have listened can gain some insight, and if they heard a nugget of wisdom that feels all too familiar for themselves or a friend, then please share the resource, because the more people we can give information to, we can save from being gaslit into really toxic, unhealthy patterns. And especially for the kids, there is hope going forward.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much. If this episode resonated, it would be so meaningful to share it, give it a rating, a review, just so we can get the tools out there and allow more people to journey forward into healthy relationships. So thanks so much, everyone, for listening. And again, Jaime, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat, visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.